Introduction. What if a nation could be judged not by its living people, but by the dead souls? It still counts as property. Greed rarely wears the face of evil. More often, it smiles politely. Imagine a dusty Russian town where names matter more than lives, where paperwork carries more value than human dignity, and where a quiet stranger arrives with a plan so absurd that it exposes the moral emptiness of an entire society. This is the world of Dead Souls, a satire so sharp that it laughs while cutting deep. Dead Souls is not merely a novel about corruption. It is a mirror held up to society's spiritual decay. Through the journey of Pavel Ivanovich Chichikov, Gogol reveals a Russia obsessed with status, ownership, and illusion. The novel argues one central truth: when people value appearances over humanity, they slowly become hollow alive in body, dead in soul. Each character Chichikov encounters represents a different form of moral emptiness, making the story a powerful critique of greed, bureaucracy, and self-deception. Love this video? Show me love. Subscribe, like, comment, and share. Hit the bell to stay updated with every new upload. Chapter 1. The Arrival of a Nobody. What kind of man arrives without history, without noise, and yet quietly rearranges the moral furniture of an entire town? In Dead Souls, Nikolai Gogol opens his novel not with thunder, but with dust, the dust of a provincial Russian town disturbed by the wheels of an ordinary carriage. Inside sits Pavel Ivanovich Chichikov, a man so carefully unremarkable that he instantly becomes dangerous. From the very first chapter, Gogol makes one thing clear: societies that value appearance over substance are most vulnerable to people who master appearances. Chichikov's entrance is deliberately plain. He is neither handsome nor ugly, neither young nor old, neither thin nor fat. This calculated neutrality is his greatest asset. In a world obsessed with categories and ranks, Chichikov refuses to stand out. Gogol's satire begins here, suggesting that moral emptiness often hides behind politeness and balance. The town receives him without suspicion, not because he proves his worth, but because he fits their expectations of respectability. From the moment Chichikov steps into the inn, his behavior reveals his method. He asks questions not about people, but about positions. Who is the governor? Who holds power? Who influences decisions? His curiosity is not human. It is strategic. Gogol uses these small details to show that Chichikov does not see society as a community, but as a system to be navigated. Where others might seek friendship, he seeks advantage. The town itself mirrors Chichikov's inner emptiness. Gogol describes it with deliberate vagueness. Familiar streets, standard buildings, predictable routines. Nothing is alive with individuality. This setting is not accidental. A town without character is the perfect home for a man without principles. Gogol suggests that moral decay does not announce itself loudly, it settles comfortably into routine. Chichikov's greatest strength lies in his manners. He flatters without excess, listens attentively, and never contradicts. When speaking to officials, he becomes a reflection of their ego. Each conversation is tailored, each compliment carefully measured. Gogol exposes a harsh truth here. Authority figures often mistake respect for virtue. The officials welcome Chichikov, not because he is trustworthy, but because he makes them feel important. As Chichikov dines with the town's elites, Gogol sharpens his satire. The conversations are empty, revolving around trivial matters, status, and surface-level morality. These men govern, yet they discuss nothing of consequence. Their power is administrative, not ethical. Through Tis Gogol establishes one of the novel's central arguments. When leadership lacks moral depth, corruption becomes invisible. What makes this chapter especially powerful is what Gogol does not reveal. We are not told Chichikov's purpose. His plans remain hidden, creating unease beneath the politeness. This narrative restraint forces the reader to pay attention, mirroring how society should scrutinize those who move quietly through its systems but rarely does. Suspicion requires thought, and thought is absent here. The innkeeper, servants, and townspeople treat Chichikov with automatic courtesy. Respect is granted not based on character, but on clothing, speech, and paperwork. Gogol subtly mocks this behavior, showing how easily symbols replace substance. A well-dressed stranger becomes more trustworthy than a known truth. Gogol's language balances humor and warning. There is comedy in the exaggerated politeness, in the mechanical routines of hospitality, yet beneath it lies discomfort. Laughter becomes a tool, disarming the reader before delivering the critique. By making the opening amusing, Gogol ensures the message penetrates deeper. Chichikov's inner world remains carefully controlled. He reveals nothing emotional, nothing spontaneous. Every gesture is purposeful. This emotional absence is crucial. Gogol presents Chichikov as a product of a society that rewards discipline without ethics. He has learned not how to live, but how to succeed. Sensei Chichikov is less a villain than a symptom. The officials' eagerness to include Chichikov exposes their own insecurity. They crave recognition, validation, and connection with perceived importance. Gogol suggests that corruption often begins not with greed, but with vanity. A society hungry for approval will always be easy to manipulate. By the end of the chapter, Chichikov has accomplished something remarkable without doing anything remarkable. He has gained access. Doors are open, invitations extended, trust established. No moral test is applied, no questions are asked. Gogol closes the chapter not with resolution, but with quiet success that feels unsettling precisely because it was so easy. This opening chapter lays the foundation for everything that follows. Chichikov's ordinariness is his disguise. The town's shallowness is his opportunity. Gogol's message is clear. When societies stop valuing integrity, they begin rewarding emptiness. Chapter 1 does not shock with action. It disturbs with recognition. We see how systems fail not dramatically, but politely. In presenting a man who is nothing in particular, Gogol forces readers to confront an uncomfortable possibility. The greatest threats are not those who break the rules openly, but those who master them flawlessly. Chichikov arrives as a nobody, but in a world that mistakes manners for morals, that is more than enough. By the final lines of the chapter, one truth stands firm. The town believes it has welcomed a harmless guest. In reality, it has revealed its own weakness. And once a society exposes its blind spots, it invites those who know how to exploit them. Chapter 1 is not merely an introduction, it is a warning delivered with a smile. Chapter 2, Manilov, the dreamer, without action. What is more dangerous to a society, open cruelty or gentle uselessness? In the second chapter of Dead Souls, Nikolai Gogol introduces a man so polite, so agreeable, and so utterly ineffective that he becomes a perfect symbol of moral emptiness, disguised as virtue. Through Manilov, Gogol warns that goodness without action is not innocence, it is negligence. Manilov lives on an estate that appears pleasant at first glance. The house sits on a hill. The view is charming, and the surroundings suggest comfort. Yet, upon closer inspection, nothing is complete. Paths lead nowhere. Bridges are planned but never built, and rooms feel decorative rather than lived in. This physical environment mirrors Manilov's inner world, full of ideas, empty of results. Gogol uses setting as character, revealing how a person's values shape the spaces they inhabit. Chichikov approaches Manilov with ease. The two men quickly bond over politeness and vague conversation. Manilov is delighted to be admired, and even more delighted to admire in return. Their dialogue floats above reality, filled with compliments and abstract notions of friendship. Gogol uses this exaggerated courtesy to expose a social habit. People often mistake warmth for depth, kindness for responsibility. Manilov's greatest flaw is not cruelty or greed, but inaction. He dreams of improvement of education for peasants, of elegant architecture, of enlightened reforms, but he never begins. His thoughts remain suspended in pleasant imagination. Gogol suggests that dreaming without discipline is another form of selfishness, as it allows one to feel virtuous without making effort. When Chichikov introduces his unusual request to purchase the names of serfs who have died, but are still registered as alive, Manilov is momentarily confused. Yet he does not question the morality or legality of the idea. Instead, He is flattered by the novelty of the conversation. The absurdity of the proposal excites him. Gogol uses this moment to demonstrate how curiosity can overpower conscience. Manilov quickly agrees to give Chichikov the dead souls for free. He even sees the transaction as a noble gesture. This is a crucial moment in the novel. Manilov believes himself generous, yet he does not consider the implications of selling human identities, even deceased ones. His generosity costs him nothing and teaches him nothing. Gogol makes clear that morality without reflection is hollow. Throughout the chapter, Gogol's tone remains gently mocking rather than harsh. Manilov is not a villain, Likave, educated and well-meaning. This makes his failure more disturbing. Gogol suggests that societies often collapse not because of monsters, but because of pleasant people who never act when action is required. Manilov's marriage further reinforces this theme. His relationship with his wife is based on shared idleness and exaggerated affection. They exchange sweet words while ignoring practical responsibilities. Their home becomes a stage where politeness replaces purpose. Through this domestic portrait, Gogol critiques a culture that values performance over productivity. Chichikov understands Manilov perfectly. He adapts his language to match Manilov's dreamy tone, speaking of friendship, trust, and mutual benefit. This adaptability shows Chichikov's intelligence and emotional emptiness. He does not manipulate through force, but through reflection, becoming whatever the other person wants to see. Gogol highlights how easily shallow goodness can be exploited. The peasants on Manilov's estate are barely mentioned, and this absence is significant. They exist only as numbers and names, not as lives. Manilov's neglect has rendered them invisible. Gogol suggests that ignoring responsibility does not remove suffering. It simply hides it from comfortable eyes. As the transaction concludes, Manilov feels uplifted. He believes he has participated in something meaningful, perhaps even progressive. This self-satisfaction is Gogol's sharpest critique. Manilov's conscience is quiet, not because he is moral, but because he never examines his actions. In this way, his calm becomes dangerous. The chapter flows effortlessly, from politeness to agreement, mirroring how easily corruption can occur when no one resists it. There is no struggle, no debate, no hesitation. Gogol shows that moral decay does not always require pressure. It often thrives on comfort. By the end of Chapter 2, Chichikov leaves with his first success. He has obtained dead souls without spending money or effort. More importantly, he has confirmed his understanding of society. People who live in dreams rarely question reality. Manilov's weakness becomes Chichikov's advantage. Gogol closes the chapter with a quiet irony. Manilov remains on his hill, smiling at unfinished plans, convinced of his own goodness. Chichikov rides away, carrying names stripped of meaning. The exchange feels harmless, yet it represents a profound moral failure. A human being has been reduced to paperwork, and kindness has been used to justify it. Chapter 2 strengthens the novel's central argument. Good intentions are meaningless without responsibility. Manilov's soul is not dark, but it is empty. In Gogol's world, emptiness is just as dangerous as evil. This chapter teaches the reader to distrust comfort, to question politeness, and to recognize that morality requires effort. If Chapter 1 warned us about systems, Chapter 2 warns us about individuals within them. Together, they form a powerful opening statement. When people stop acting, corruption no longer needs resistance. Simply walks in, smiles, and is welcomed. Chapter 3. Korobushka. Fear, ignorance, and the price of doubt. What happens when fear replaces understanding and caution becomes a cage. In Chapter 3 of Dead Souls, Nikolai Gogol introduces a small landowning widow whose mind is ruled not by cruelty or ambition, but by confusion and suspicion. Through her, Gogol exposes another face of moral emptiness, ignorance protected by fear. If Manilov showed the danger of inaction, Korobushka reveals the danger of narrow thinking. Korobushka lives far from the polite circles of the town, in a rural estate marked by disorder and anxious thrift. Her house is filled with stored goods, grain, feathers, cloth, yet nothing seems properly managed. Everything is saved, nothing is improved. This environment reflects her mental state: cluttered, cautious, and resistant to change. Gogol uses her home to show how fear of loss can prevent growth. Chichikov arrives at Korobushka's estate by accident after losing his way during a storm. This randomness is important. Unlike Manilov, who welcomes guests with delight, Korobushka receives Chichikov with suspicion. Every question feels like a threat, every offer like a trick. Gogol suggests that isolation breeds mistrust, and mistrust weakens judgment. Korobushka's greatest concern is being cheated. She does not fully understand Chichikov's proposal, yet she senses danger in it. However, instead of seeking clarity, she clings to doubt. Gogol highlights a crucial flaw. Fear without knowledge leads not to wisdom, but paralysis. Korobushka is not, Kerfushi is trapped. The conversation between Chichikov and Korobushka is deliberately exhausting. She asks the same questions repeatedly, circles the same doubts, and refuses to move forward. Gogol uses repetition to satirize her thinking. The reader feels Chichikov's frustration, but also recognizes the deeper problem. A society that does not educate its people creates minds unable to decide. When Chichikov explains that he wishes to buy dead soul serfs who have died but are still recorded, Korobushka reacts with alarm. She worries about sin, legal consequences, and hidden motives. Yet, she never asks why such a system exists. Gogol points out that ignorance often focuses on personal risk rather than systemic injustice. Unlike Manilov, Korobushka eventually demands payment. Her fear turns into greed, but a small, anxious kind. She worries she might lose profit if she agrees too quickly. This hesitation exposes a moral contradiction. She fears wrongdoing, yet she is willing to sell human identities for the right price. Gogol shows how fear and greed often coexist. Korobushka's attachment to trivial possessions further defines her character. She values honey, feathers, and cloth more than ideas or principles. These objects provide security, while abstract thinking feels dangerous. Gogol suggests that when material comfort becomes the only measure of safety, ethical thought disappears. Chichikov adapts once again. He becomes patient, reassuring, and persistent. His success depends on understanding Korobushka's fear. He offers explanations, promises legality, and uses authority to calm her doubts. This interaction reveals how easily fear can be manipulated when knowledge is absent. The peasants in Korobushka's estate exist as distant figures. Much like in Manilov's world, they are counted, not known. Korobushka manages them as resources rather than lives. Gogol emphasizes that ignorance does not prevent exploitation, it merely makes it clumsier. Eventually, Korobushka agrees to the sale. The decision does not come from understanding or trust, but exhaustion. She gives in because thinking has become too difficult. Gogol delivers a subtle but powerful critique here. Decisions made under confusion are rarely moral. After the transaction, Korobushka is not relieved. Instead, she remains anxious, wondering if she has been cheated. This lingering doubt shows that fear never resolves itself, it demands constant reassurance. Gogol contrasts this with Chichikov's calm satisfaction, highlighting the imbalance between manipulation and vulnerability. Korobushka's character represents a larger social issue. A population left uneducated and isolated becomes easy prey for systems it does not understand. Gogol does not mock her intelligence alone. He condemns the conditions that shaped it. Her fear is learned, not innate. As Chichikov departs, the chapter leaves behind a feeling of discomfort rather than humor. Unlike Manilov's pleasant emptiness, Korobushka's world feels heavy and tense. Gogol broadens his satire, showing that moral decay wears many faces, some smiling, some trembling. Chapter 3 strengthens the novel's argument by adding another layer to the portrait of society. If Manilov showed how dreams without action enable corruption, Korobushka shows how fear without knowledge sustains it. Together, they form a chain of weakness that Chichikov exploits effortlessly. The flow of the chapter mirrors Korobushka's mind: slow, repetitive, and uncertain. This deliberate pacing forces the reader to experience her confusion firsthand. Gogol uses structure as meaning, making form reinforce content. By the end of the chapter, the transaction is complete, yet nothing feels resolved. Chichikov moves closer to his goal, while Koroboshka remains trapped in doubt. The imbalance is striking. One gains power through understanding human weakness, the other loses peace through ignorance. Chapter 3 delivers a clear warning. Fear is not wisdom, and caution without knowledge is not virtue. Koroboshka's soul is not evil, but it is closed. In Gogol's world, a closed soul is as vulnerable as an empty one. The chapter urges readers to recognize that without education and critical thought, morality cannot survive. Chapter 4 Nozdryov. Chaos, lies, and shameless corruption. What happens when corruption no longer hides behind politeness or fear, but laughs loudly in public? In Chapter 4 of Dead Souls, Nikolai Gogol introduces a man who represents moral decay in its most aggressive and chaotic form. Unlike Manilov's pleasant emptiness, or Koroboshka's anxious ignorance, Nozdryov's soul is loud, dishonest, and dangerously unpredictable. Through him, Gogol shows that when shame disappears, disorder becomes contagious. Nozdryov is introduced as a familiar type, someone everyone knows, yet no one trusts. He is energetic, boastful, and constantly involved in scandals. His reputation precedes him, yet society continues to tolerate him. Gogol's satire sharpens here. Communities often excuse destructive behavior when it is entertaining. Nozdryov survives not because he is respectable, but because people are used to him. The setting of this chapter reflects Nozdryov's nature. His estate is noisy, disorderly, and full of neglected responsibilities. Dogs bark, servants shout, and nothing seems stable. Gogol uses this chaos to mirror Nozdryov's inner life, where Manilov's estate was incomplete and Koroboshka's was cluttered. Nozdryov's is wild. Each landowner becomes a physical expression of a moral condition. Nozdryov speaks constantly, rarely listening. He exaggerates his achievements, invents stories, and contradicts himself without embarrassment. Truth has no value to him beyond entertainment. Gogol suggests that habitual lying destroys not only trust, but reality itself. When lies are constant, meaning collapses. Chichikov approaches Nozdryov with caution. For the first time, his polished politeness is less effective. Nozdryov does not respond to flattery in predictable ways. He enjoys conflict and thrives on confusion. This encounter reveals a limitation in Chichikov's strategy. Manipulation works best on those who value order. Chaos resists control. When Chichikov introduces his proposal to purchase dead souls, Nozdryov reacts with excitement rather than confusion or fear. He immediately imagines schemes, trades, and games. For him, everything is a gamble. Gogol highlights a crucial distinction. Nozdryov understands the immorality of the deal, but he does not care. His failure is not ignorance, it is shamelessness. Nozdryov attempts to trick Chichikov, offering to trade dead souls for dogs, horses, or fake documents. He lies openly about the quality and value of what he offers. Gogol's humor peaks here, but beneath the comedy lies a serious warning. A society that tolerates constant dishonesty eventually loses the ability to distinguish truth from fraud. The presence of gambling in this chapter is symbolic. Nozdryov treats life itself as a game of chance. There are no consequences in his mind, only wins and losses. Gogol uses this mindset to critique reckless ambition. When risk replaces responsibility, destruction becomes inevitable. Unlike previous landowners, Nozdryov does not complete a clean transaction with Chichikov. The deal collapses into argument and near violence. This failure is significant. Gogol shows that extreme corruption cannot even cooperate with itself. Disorder eventually turns inward. Nozdryov's interactions with servants and guests further reveal his character. He abuses authority casually, shifting between friendliness and aggression. Power, in his hands, becomes another toy. Gogol emphasizes that when authority lacks moral restraint, it becomes abusive by nature. The chapter's pacing is fast and unstable, reflecting Nozdryov's temperament. Conversations jump suddenly. Moods change without warning, and tension builds unpredictably. Gogol uses rhythm to deepen character, making the reader feel the discomfort of dealing with a man who cannot be reasoned with. Despite his flaws, Nozdryov remains socially active. He attends dinners, gatherings, and public events. This social acceptance is Gogol's most biting critique. Society does not reject him. It merely complains about him. In doing so, it enables his behavior. Gogol suggests that tolerance without accountability is complicity. Chichikov's failure with Nozdryov marks an important moment in the novel. It reminds the reader that not all corruption is useful. Some forms are too chaotic to control. Yet even this failure serves Chichikov's journey by revealing the limits of his method. By the end of the chapter, Nozdryov remains unchanged. He has learned nothing, lost nothing, and will likely continue as before. This lack of consequence reinforces Gogol's bleak observation. Shamelessness survives in societies that lack moral enforcement. Chapter 4 expands the novel's moral map. If Manilov represented emptiness, Koroboska fear, Nozdryov represents aggressive disorder. Together, they show that corruption is not one thing, but many, each feeding off a system that refuses to confront it. The flow of this chapter contrasts sharply with earlier ones, keeping the narrative dynamic while reinforcing thematic unity. Each encounter deepens Gogol's argument. When truth loses value, chaos takes its place. As Chichikov leaves Nozdryov behind, the reader senses danger not just in individuals, but in the culture that permits them. Gogol's warning is clear and unsettling. A society that laughs at dishonesty will one day be ruled by it. Chapter 4 does not ask the reader to sympathize. It demands recognition. Nozdryov is extreme, but he is not rare. He exists wherever lies are tolerated. Responsibility is avoided, and shame is dismissed as weakness. In exposing him, Gogol urges us to reclaim moral boundaries before disorder becomes normal. Chapter 5 Sabakovich, brutal honesty and the soul of materialism. What if corruption stopped pretending to be polite and instead spoke with cold honesty? In Chapter 5 of Dead Souls, Nikolai Gogol presents Sabakovich, a man whose moral emptiness is not hidden behind dreams, fear, or chaos, but expressed through hard realism. Sabakovich is not confused like Koroboshka, nor reckless like Nozdryov. He is clear, calculating, and brutally materialistic. Through him, Gogol shows a terrifying truth. When greed becomes logical, it becomes respectable. Sabakovich's physical appearance immediately signals his nature. He is heavy, solid, and unmoving, like a bear. Everything about him suggests weight and resistance. Gogol uses this imagery to emphasize Sabakovich's worldview fixed, grounded, and entirely practical. There is no flexibility in his thinking, no room for imagination or empathy. What exists must be useful, or it is worthless. His estate reflects this same philosophy. The house is strong, well-built, and functional. There is nothing decorative or unnecessary. Furniture is heavy, walls are thick, and everything is designed to last. Unlike Manilov's unfinished dreams or Nozdryov's disorder, Sabakovich's world is complete but soulless. Gogol implies that efficiency without humanity is another form of decay. Chichikov approaches Sabakovich carefully. Politeness alone will not work here. Sabakovich sees through flattery and despises soft language. Chichikov adapts once again, shifting to directness and respect for strength. This adaptability highlights Chichikov's moral emptiness. He has no values, only strategies. Conversation at Sabakovich's table is blunt and dismissive. He criticizes officials, mocks intellectuals, and praises only those who produce tangible results. He reduces people to their usefulness. Gogol uses these harsh judgments to reveal Sabakovich's philosophy. Human worth is measured by output, not character. When the topic of dead souls arises, Sabakovich immediately understands its value. There is no confusion, fear, or excitement, only calculation. He knows the system, and he knows how to profit from it. Gogol makes a critical point here. Intelligence without ethics is not wisdom. It is exploitation. Sabakovich refuses to give the souls away cheaply. He argues, negotiates, and assigns value even to the dead. He lists the strengths of his former peasants, praising their labor as if they were still tools in use. This moment is deeply unsettling. Sobakevich speaks with admiration, yet strips these men of humanity, reducing their lives to productivity. Unlike Manilov's generosity or Korobishka's hesitation, Sobakevich's transaction is clean and deliberate. There is no emotional conflict. The deal becomes a business agreement, devoid of conscience. Gogol suggests that systems built on profit alone naturally erase morality. Sobakevich's honesty is often mistaken for integrity, but Gogol carefully dismantles this illusion. Sobakevich is honest about his greed, but that honesty does not make him virtuous. In fact, it makes his corruption more efficient. Gogol warns that truth without compassion can be as destructive as lies. The chapter's tone is heavy and grounded, reflecting Sobakevich's presence. The pacing is slower, the dialogue more deliberate. This contrast with Nozdryev's chaos emphasizes the range of corruption. Gogol shows that moral decay does not require disorder. It can exist within perfect structure. Chichikov ultimately agrees to Sobakevich's price. This moment marks a shift in Chichikov's journey. For the first time, he pays a real cost. Gogol suggests that engaging with hard materialism demands sacrifice, not deception alone. Sobakevich remains unchanged after the deal. He is satisfied, secure, and unmoved. There is no doubt or fear, only calculation completed. This emotional emptiness is the chapter's most chilling element. Gogol implies that such people do not suffer from moral conflict because they have removed morality entirely. The peasants Sobakevich describes are portrayed as strong workers, yet their individuality is erased. They exist only as labor and names on paper. Gogol condemns a worldview that praises strength while denying humanity. Chapter 5 deepens the novel's critique by showing corruption as a stable, organized force. Sobakevich does not disrupt society, fits into it perfectly. That is precisely the danger. Systems built on profit reward men like him. The flow of the chapter reinforces this message. Every conversation leads logically to the transaction, making the moral failure feel inevitable. Gogol suggests that when values are replaced by calculations, outcomes lose ethical choice. By the end of the chapter, Chichikov leaves with more souls and less money, while Sobakevich remains rooted in his material certainty. The exchange feels final, irreversible. Gogol leaves the reader with a heavy realization. When humanity is measured only in terms of usefulness, souls truly become dead. Chapter 5 stands as one of the novel's most powerful warnings. If Manilov showed how kindness can fail, Korobushka how fear can trap, and Nozdryev how chaos can destroy, Sobakevich shows how logic itself can become immoral when stripped of empathy. Gogol does not ask the reader to hate Sobakevich. He asks us to recognize him. In modern systems driven by productivity and profit, Sobakevich is not an exception. AI is a model, and that recognition is the chapter's most unsettling truth. Chapter 6, Plioshkin, the collapse of the human soul. What remains of a human being when possession replaces purpose and fear of loss consumes love, dignity, and memory? In Chapter 6 of Dead Souls, Nikolai Gogol presents Plyushkin, the most disturbing figure in the novel, a man who is no longer merely corrupt, but spiritually ruined. Through Plyushkin, Gogol shows the final stage of moral decay. Not chaos, not greed, but complete dehumanization. Plyushkin's appearance shocks both Chichikov and the reader. He looks less like a landowner and more like a beggar clothed in rags, hunched, and nearly unrecognizable. Gogol intentionally blurs the line between wealth and poverty here. Plyushkin owns vast property, yet lives in filth. This contradiction becomes the chapter's central image. Abundance without humanity. The estate itself reflects its master is a broken soul. Buildings rot, fields decay, and supplies lie unused while peasants starve. Food spoils in storage, tools rust, and resources waste away. Gogol uses this destruction to show that hoarding does not preserve wealth, it kills it. Plyushkin's fear of loss has produced total ruin. Unlike Sobakevich, who values strength and utility, Plyushkin values nothing except possession. Objects no longer serve purpose. They are collected compulsively. He gathers broken items, scraps, and trash, unable to discard anything. Gogol presents this behavior as moral illness. Greed has passed into madness. Chichikov initially struggles to recognize Playushkin as a landowner. This confusion is symbolic. Playushkin has lost his social identity along with his humanity. Gogol suggests that social roles mean nothing when moral collapse is complete. Conversation with Playushkin reveals a mind trapped in suspicion and bitterness. He accuses everyone of theft, believes servants conspire against him, and trusts no one. Love has turned into paranoia. Gogol emphasizes that extreme greed isolates individuals until they are alone with their fear. Playushkin was not always this way. Gogol provides fragments of his past, a once careful, reasonable man with a family and orderly estate. Tragedy, loss, and obsession slowly transformed him. This history is crucial. Gogol does not present evil as sudden. He shows it as gradual neglect of the soul. As Playushkin retreated inward, his household collapsed. His children drifted away. His wife died and his estate fell into chaos. Yet instead of responding with compassion or reflection, Playushkin responded with control. He replaced relationships with locks and inventories. Gogol shows how grief, when unprocessed, hardens into cruelty. When Chichikov presents his proposal to buy dead souls, Playushkin reacts with surprising enthusiasm. He sees immediate financial advantage, less tax burden, fewer obligations. There is no moral hesitation. Death, to him, is an accounting problem. This reaction marks the darkest point in the novel so far. Playushkin agrees quickly and cheaply. Unlike Sobakovich, he does not bargain for value. His desire is not profit, but relief from responsibility. Gogol reveals a chilling truth. When humanity disappears, even greed loses structure. Only avoidance remains. The peasants on Playushkin's estate suffer intensely. Many have died, fled, or wasted away. Yet Playushkin speaks of them as thieves and burdens. Gogol uses this cruelty to show that moral collapse spreads downward. Those without power pay the price for those without conscience. Chichikov's success here feels different. It is easy, almost effortless. This ease is frightening. Gogol implies that extreme corruption creates no resistance. It welcomes exploitation. When souls are already dead, nothing feels wrong. The chapter's tone is heavy and mournful. Humor fades, replaced by discomfort. Gogol shifts from satire to tragedy, forcing the reader to confront the consequences of unchecked greed. Playushkin is not amusing. He is horrifying. Gogol's descriptive language slows the pace, emphasizing decay and stagnation. Time seems frozen on Playushkin's estate. This stillness reinforces the theme. Without moral renewal, life itself stops progressing. Playushkin represents the end of a journey, not just Chichikov's, but society's. If Manilov was empty, Koroboshka fearful Nozdryov, Chaltik and Sobakovich materialistic, Playushkin is what they could all become. He is the final destination of moral neglect. As Chichikov leaves, the reader feels no satisfaction. The transaction has succeeded, yet something precious has been lost. Gogol leaves us with an image of a man surrounded by wealth and dying alone. This image lingers longer than any joke. Chapter 6 serves as a moral climax. Gogol no longer mocks, he mourns. Through Playushkin, he warns that when societies prioritize possession over compassion, they do not merely create injustice, they destroy souls. The flow of the chapter carries the reader from shock to sorrow, deepening the novel's philosophical weight. Gogol asks not whether Playushkin is evil, but how he became this way and whether others are following the same path. By the end, one truth stands undeniable. Greed that begins as caution can end as annihilation. Playushkin is not an exception. He is a future written in advance for any society that forgets its humanity. Chapter 6 completes the first half of Dead Souls by revealing the ultimate cost of moral decay. From polite emptiness to total collapse, Gogol traces a path that is both historical and timeless. And in doing so, he forces the reader to confront the most unsettling question of all. At what point does saving things cost us ourselves? Chapter 7 Paper Souls and a Paper Nation. What happens when paper replaces truth and signatures outweigh human life? In Chapter 7 of Dead Souls, Nikolai Gogol shifts his focus away from individual landowners and exposes the larger system that makes Chichikov's scheme possible. This chapter is not centered on a single character, but on bureaucracy itself, a cold, mechanical force that transforms living reality into lifeless records. Gogol reveals that corruption does not survive on greed alone. It survives because systems prefer documents to conscience. After leaving Plyushkin, Chichikov turns toward official procedures. His journey now moves from estates to offices, from private weakness to public negligence. This shift is crucial. Gogol wants the reader to understand that Chichikov's success is not accidental. It is carefully supported by administrative blindness. A system that values forms over facts becomes a perfect home for deception. The bureaucratic world Gogol describes is slow, ritualistic, and absurd. Clerks shuffle papers endlessly. Officials speak in rehearsed phrases, and stamps fall with ceremonial importance. Everything appears orderly, yet nothing meaningful is examined. Gogol's satire sharpens here. Order without thought is not stability, is paralysis. Chichikov thrives in this environment. He understands that the system does not ask why, only whether the paperwork is complete. His dead souls exist legally, even if they are long buried. Gogol uses this irony to expose the terrifying power of abstraction. Once people are reduced to numbers, their absence no longer matters. The officials involved do not question Chichikov's intentions. They admire his politeness, respect his documents, and trust his appearance. Authority is transferred automatically to those who look official. Gogol suggests that bureaucracy encourages moral laziness. Thinking becomes optional when rules appear sufficient. One of the chapter's strongest critiques lies in how responsibility dissolves. No single official feels accountable. Each follows procedure, assuming someone else will think. Gogol shows how systems distribute guilt so evenly that no one feels it at all. Corruption flourishes not because everyone is evil, but because no one feels responsible. The language Gogol uses to describe offices is intentionally dull. This dullness is meaningful. It mirrors the emotional emptiness of bureaucratic life. Passion, empathy, and imagination have no place here. Only compliance matters. Gogol implies that when institutions eliminate emotion, they also eliminate morality. Chichikov's calm confidence contrasts sharply with the confusion of clerks. He speaks their language, respects hierarchy, and never challenges authority. By doing so, he becomes invisible. Gogol highlights a disturbing truth. Those who fully obey broken systems often benefit most from them. This chapter also deepens the novel's central metaphor. Dead souls are not only deceased peasants, they are people erased by systems. The bureaucracy itself is populated by living bodies performing dead actions. Gogol blurs the line between literal and symbolic death, suggesting that spiritual emptiness is widespread. Unlike earlier chapters, filled with humor, Chapter 7 carries a quieter menace. There is less laughter and more unease. The danger here is subtle and widespread. Gogol forces the reader to recognize that the greatest threat is not the criminal, but the machine that normalizes his crime. The flow of the chapter mirrors bureaucratic process, slow, repetitive, and circular. This structural choice reinforces Gogol's message. Progress appears to occur, but nothing truly moves. Papers travel, while truth remains stationary. Chichikov completes crucial steps toward legitimizing his scheme. Each stamp and signature strengthens his illusion of wealth. Gogol shows how easily legality can be manufactured. When law loses its moral foundation, it becomes a tool rather than a safeguard. The officials' conversations reveal their priorities. Rank, promotion, reputation. Ethics never enter the discussion. Gogol criticizes a culture where success is measured by position rather than responsibility. Such a culture does not prevent corruption, it rewards Italiano. By the end of the chapter, Chichikov stands closer to triumph than ever before. Yet the reader feels increasing discomfort. His success feels too smooth, too logical. Gogol wants us to feel this unease. It is the sensation of watching a system function perfectly while doing something profoundly wrong. Chapter 7 acts as a bridge in the novel. The earlier chapters exposed individual moral failures. This one exposes collective failure. Gogol makes it clear that Chichikov is not an anomaly. He is a product of a society that mistakes procedure for justice. The connectivity of the novel tightens here. Manilov's emptiness, Korobishka's ignorance, Nazariov's chaos, Sobokovich's materialism, and Plyushkin's collapse all feed into this bureaucratic machine. Each weakness becomes fuel for the system's indifference. As the chapter closes, Gogol leaves the reader with an unsettling realization. The most efficient form of corruption is the one that looks respectable. No shouting, no violence, just paperwork completed correctly. This is the true horror of Chapter 7. Gogol's warning resonates beyond his time. Any society that allows systems to replace judgment risks creating legal crimes and moral silence. Dead Souls does not merely criticize individuals. It condemns structures that erase humanity quietly. Chapter 7 reminds us that when systems forget people, people become numbers, and numbers are easy to steal. Chichikov walks forward with confidence, but the reader walks away with doubt, forced to confront the chilling truth that corruption is strongest when it feels normal. Chapter 8. Society's shallow morality. Rumors, gossip, and panic. What becomes of a society when judgment is dictated not by truth, but by rumor? In Chapter 8 of Dead Souls, Nikolai Gogol shifts the lens from individuals and bureaucracy to the collective conscience or lack thereof of society itself. Here, Chichikov's presence triggers waves of speculation, illustrating that moral weakness is not confined to individuals, but spreads through social networks. Gogol uses gossip as a mirror, reflecting how shallow values allow corruption to flourish. As Chichikov travels from estate to estate, his reputation begins to precede him. Each new landowner has already heard of the mysterious man buying dead souls. The news is incomplete, distorted, and increasingly sensationalized. Gogol captures the mechanics of rumor perfectly. It spreads faster than fact, gains authority through repetition, and survives because people prefer stories that excite or confirm their biases. No one asks for evidence. Instead, they speculate. Is Chichikov a secret government agent? A swindler? A spy? A nobleman in disguise? Each possibility is more dramatic than the last. Gogol's satire here is sharp. Society judges based not on morality, but on intrigue. Ethics are irrelevant. Spectacle rules. The social gatherings described in this chapter are elaborate stages of performance. Officials and landowners exchange opinions, display curiosity, and test each other's knowledge of the truth. These exchanges are governed by manners and hierarchy rather than conscience. Gogol emphasizes that social rituals often mask moral laziness, creating an environment in which appearances matter more than actions. Gossip does more than distort facts. It shapes behavior. Landowners begin adjusting their conduct to align with expectations, hoping to appear wise, cautious, or authoritative. Gogol shows how collective fear and speculation become self-reinforcing. People act not out of ethical reasoning, but to maintain reputation. Morality is performative, not genuine. Chichikov, aware of these dynamics, manipulates them subtly. He never reveals his plan outright, but allows hints and impressions to circulate. By letting others fill in the gaps with assumptions, he gains influence without force. Gogol highlights the irony. Society's own weakness enables its exploitation. Those who judge care more about appearance than reality. The chapter also explores the consequences of rumor-driven panic. Officials grow anxious, imagining conspiracies where none exist. Their fear spreads quickly, paralyzing rational thought. Gogol contrasts this with Chichikov's calm, showing that confidence thrives in environments dominated by suspicion. Panic becomes a tool in the hands of the morally flexible. Peasants and lower-class observers are largely absent in this chapter, emphasizing that moral failure is concentrated among the privileged. Gogol critiques a hierarchical society that mistakes social status for virtue. Those with power fail not only through direct action but through negligence and credulity. The chapters flow mirrors. The spread of gossip, conversations jump from house to house, idea to idea, rumor to rumor. Transitions are smooth but cumulative, reinforcing connectivity. Each anecdote builds upon the last, showing how moral weakness can ripple across a community. The narrative becomes a network, illustrating the interconnectedness of human folly. Gogol uses humor and irony to highlight absurdity. Landowners argue passionately about Chichikov's intentions while having no real evidence. Their self-importance blinds them. Laughter is layered with critique, forcing the reader to recognize familiar social patterns in their own context. By the chapter's conclusion, Chichikov's position strengthens not through action, but through society's own shallow morality. People believe what they want to believe, and moral consideration is entirely secondary. Gogol suggests that corruption flourishes most effectively in cultures that reward perception over principle. Chapter 8 deepens the novel's central argument. Ethical failure is social as well as individual. Earlier chapters focused on personal greed, fear, and chaos. Here Gogol shows how collective weakness magnifies individual exploitation. A society that prioritizes reputation over truth becomes a collaborator in its own moral decay. The chapter ends with tension rather than resolution. Chichikov moves on, his plan proceeding smoothly, while the rumor mill churns This juxtaposition emphasizes the difference between deliberate strategy and reactive society. Gogol leaves the reader uneasy, recognizing the quiet danger of thoughtless conformity. The connectivity of the novel strengthens here. Manilov's emptiness, Korobishka's fear, Nozdryov's chaos, Sobokevich's calculation, Plyushkin's collapse, and bureaucratic indifference all feed into social panic. Each weakness compounds the next, creating a network of vulnerability that Chichikov exploits effortlessly. Gogol's warning is timeless. Societies that rely on gossip, spectacle, and fear for judgment are doomed to be manipulated. Morality must be rooted in reflection and responsibility, not the opinions of others. Without this, corruption becomes inevitable, and ethics meaningless. In sum, Chapter 8 demonstrates that moral decay is amplified by society itself. Rumors, shallow judgment, and panic transform individual flaws into systemic risk. Chichikov's continued success is proof. Corruption does not only survive, it thrives when society abdicates reason and replaces it with speculation. Chapter 9. Fear, Suspicion, and Social Conspiracies. How easily does a society betray itself when fear replaces reason and suspicion governs action? In Chapter 9 of Dead Souls, Nikolai Gogol examines the subtle yet pervasive mechanisms by which human anxiety allows corruption to thrive. Unlike earlier chapters that focus on individual moral failings or bureaucratic weakness, this chapter illustrates the collective vulnerability of a society preoccupied with gossip, competition, and self-preservation. Chichikov continues his journey through towns, observing the social dynamics with keen attention. Landowners speak in half-truths and innuendo, weaving narratives about him that are more imaginative than factual. Gogol highlights that suspicion is contagious. One person's uncertainty ignites another's fear, and soon an entire community is acting on assumptions rather than evidence. This chapter emphasizes the distinction between fear and knowledge. People are not suspicious because they know the truth, are suspicious because uncertainty triggers self. Landowners and officials ask questions not to uncover reality, but to protect themselves, maintain reputation, or gain advantage. Gogol's satire is sharp. A society governed by fear will punish the innocent and reward the cunning. Chichikov's brilliance lies in his awareness of these dynamics. He does not confront suspicion directly. He works within it. By allowing rumors and doubts to circulate, he manipulates others into compliance. Gogol demonstrates that moral weakness is magnified when deception aligns with human anxiety. The most effective manipulation often requires no direct action, only understanding of human psychology. The conversations Chichikov overhears reveal the hierarchy of concern. Landowners worry about taxes, debts, and appearances more than ethical conduct. Officials fear losing favor or making mistakes rather than doing wrong. Gogol critiques this social structure, showing that fear-driven governance fosters a culture of self-interest over integrity. Gossip and rumor are central tools in this environment. They are repeated, exaggerated, and embroidered with each retelling. Chichikov exploits this by appearing mysterious yet respectable, ensuring that speculation works in his favor. Gogol emphasizes that, when people prioritize story over substance, truth loses value and corruption becomes normalized. Unlike in previous chapters where individuals acted with clear flaws, here the collective mindset allows moral decay to accelerate. Fear operates as a silent collaborator, enabling Chichikov to acquire dead souls more easily. Gogol implies that systemic corruption is rarely enforced by low-it, is permitted by social weakness. The chapter's tone is tense and deliberate. Conversations are filled with hesitation, ellipses, and interruptions, mirroring the fragmented nature of social suspicion. This pacing immerses the reader in the uncertainty that pervades every interaction, reinforcing the thematic connection between narrative structure and content. Chichikov's interactions with various landowners reveal patterns of moral compromise. People who might otherwise act ethically hesitate, calculate, or defer. Gogol demonstrates that when fear dominates social reasoning, even minor acts of self-interest can cascade into widespread corruption. The moral climate becomes self-reinforcing. Each person's caution validates another's manipulation. Peasants remain largely absent, highlighting the disconnect between social elites and the lives they control. Gogol uses this absence to underline a critical point. Societal corruption is not only personal, but structural. The most vulnerable bear the consequences of a network of fear and suspicion above them. By the end of the chapter, Chichikov has successfully navigated yet another community, acquiring additional dead souls without confrontation or moral scrutiny. His journey underscores a disturbing reality. When society is ruled by suspicion and fear, manipulation is effortless, and corruption becomes a natural outcome. Gogol warns that such societies are fragile, not because of external threats, but because their moral foundations are internally compromised. Chapter 9 strengthens the novel's connectivity by linking individual vices to collective weaknesses. Manilov's inaction, Korobishka's fear, Nozdryov's chaos, Sobokovich's materialism, Plyoshkin's obsession, bureaucratic indifference, and rumor-driven society all form a chain that Chichikov exploits systematically. Each element interacts, showing that moral decay is both personal and societal. Gogol's humor, while present, is darker here. Satire gives way to tension, irony to unease. The reader recognizes familiar patterns in social behavior, provoking reflection and discomfort. The absurdity of collective panic contrasts sharply with the meticulous efficiency of Chichikov, reinforcing the novel's central themes. The chapter concludes with a sense of inevitability. Fear and suspicion will continue to guide behavior, and Chichikov's success appears unstoppable. Gogol leaves the reader with a crucial insight. Corruption is not merely the act of a clever individual, but the product of a society that allows fear and rumor to govern its conscience. In sum, Chapter 9 of Dead Souls serves as both a continuation and an amplification of Gogol's critique. Earlier chapters depicted personal vice and institutional weakness. Here, the reader witnesses the subtle power of collective moral failure. The narrative demonstrates that even when individuals are flawed, the social environment determines whether those flaws remain contained or spread. Chichikov's unchallenged success illustrates a grim truth. Human anxiety, left unchecked, can be as destructive as greed or cruelty. Chapter 10. The Gathering of Dead Souls and the Illusion of Success. What is the true cost of ambition when success is built on lifeless numbers instead of living people? In Chapter 10 of Dead Souls, Nikolai Gogol brings Chichikov's scheme to a critical point, highlighting both the allure and the emptiness of his pursuits. While the previous chapters explored moral decay in individuals, bureaucracies, and society, this chapter examines the culmination of Chichikov's plan and the haunting consequences of exploiting human absence. Chichikov has now gathered a significant number of dead souls, each purchased under varying circumstances, from Manilov's naive generosity to Plyoshkin's obsessive greed. Gogol emphasizes that while each transaction differed in tone and method, the result is identical. Living individuals are replaced by paper, and moral reflection is bypassed. Success, in this sense, is entirely artificial, a construct of numbers rather than ethics. The chapter opens with Chichikov's reflections on his achievements. He imagines himself as prosperous, respected, and clever. Gogol carefully contrasts this self-satisfaction with the emptiness of his acquisitions. Each name on a list represents a life, now dead, yet the absence of those lives carries no weight for Chichikov. Here, Gogol delivers a chilling meditation on ambition detached from conscience. Chichikov's interactions with landowners in this chapter are marked by a sense of ritual and repetition. He has perfected his approach: politeness, flattery, and careful observation. Each new meeting is smoother than the last. The pattern is clear. When human weakness is predictable, exploitation becomes a precise art. Gogol illustrates that corruption is often systematic, relying less on chance than on careful strategy. The dialogue emphasizes moral neutrality. Landowners participate in transactions for reasons as varied as greed, fear, or vanity. None fully question the ethics of selling dead souls. Gogol suggests that when society normalizes exploitation, immorality becomes invisible, and compliance masquerades as normal behavior. Even generosity or caution is manipulated without resistance. Gogol's description of Chichikov's method reveals a character who is efficient, calculating, and detached. He observes human behavior, adjusts to it, and converts weakness into opportunity. While his charm is effective, it is devoid of empathy. The chapter's underlying tension arises from this dissonance. The reader is compelled to admire his intelligence while recoiling at his morality. The accumulation of dead souls also serves as a metaphor for societal corruption. Just as Chichikov collects these names, society collects its own moral compromises. Each transaction symbolizes the broader pattern Gogol has been constructing. Fear, chaos, calculation, obsession, and rumor all contribute to a world where life is quantified and ethics are optional. Humor in this chapter is dark, often ironic. Landowners are depicted as caricatures, yet the exaggeration underscores a profound truth. Folly is not merely amusing, it enables exploitation. Gogol's satire deepens, forcing the reader to consider how easily societal weakness can be mobilized for personal gain. The narrative flow mirrors Chichikov's systematic approach. Events proceed logically from a state to a state, echoing the methodical accumulation of souls. Transitions are smooth, creating an almost hypnotic rhythm that parallels the effortless efficiency of corruption. Gogol ensures that form reinforces content, making the process of acquisition both compelling and unsettling. Despite Chichikov's apparent success, the chapter maintains an undercurrent of unease. Gogol reminds the reader that this triumph is hollow. Wealth, based on absence, accomplishment measured by dead names, and status achieved through manipulation cannot satisfy the human spirit. The emptiness of Chichikov's victories mirrors the emptiness of the society that enabled them. The peasants themselves remain invisible, reinforcing the novel essay Moral Decay. They are reduced to numbers, records, and commodities. Gogol emphasizes that exploitation is most complete when it erases individuality, transforming living beings into abstract data. This abstraction is the heart of the novel's satirical power. Chapter 10 also examines the psychological effect on Chichikov. While he experiences pride and anticipation, he lacks joy rooted in human connection. Gogol highlights the isolation inherent in a life built on deception. Even success cannot replace ethical dissonance or the loss of genuine relationships. By the chapter's conclusion, Chichikov's scheme is near its peak. The novel presents a duality. Outwardly, the protagonist appears triumphant. Inwardly, the narrative invites reflection on the cost of such triumph. Gogol's artistry lies in balancing plot progression with philosophical critique, making the reader simultaneously witness and judge. The chapter reinforces connectivity to earlier themes: Manilov's emptiness, Korobishka's fear, Nozdryev's chaos, Sobokevich's calculation, Plyushkin's obsession, bureaucracy, and rumor all converge to create a society perfectly exploitable by This structural unity underscores the novel's central thesis. Corruption is multifaceted, cumulative, and systemic. Finally, Gogol's closing reflections in this chapter emphasize the peril of valuing appearance over substance. Chichikov's outward success masks the moral decay that surrounds him. The chapter ends not with resolution, but with contemplation, leaving the reader aware that the accumulation of dead souls symbolizes a broader social and ethical failure. In sum, Chapter 10 of Dead Souls presents a climax of both plot and theme. Chichikov's victories demonstrate the mechanics of exploitation, but also reveal its hollowness. Gogol's satire, philosophical insight, and structural cohesion combine to show that when society prioritizes appearance, procedure, and life itself becomes expendable, and morality is reduced to paper. Chapter 11. The Seeds of Doubt and the Hollow Triumph. What is the weight of success when it is built upon deception, manipulation, and the absence of conscience? In Chapter 11 of Dead Souls, Nikolai Gogol begins to explore the first tremors of unease in Chichikov's carefully constructed world. After meticulously acquiring countless dead souls, the protagonist faces not the immediate consequences of the law, but the subtle, internal recognition of moral hollowness, a theme Gogol has been weaving throughout the novel. Chichikov's interactions with landowners in this chapter reflect both his mastery and the first signs of disruption. While outwardly polite, methodical, and persuasive, he begins to notice inconsistencies, hesitations, and the occasional glimmer of intuition among those he encounters. These small cracks serve as metaphors for the limits of manipulation. No scheme, however carefully executed, is completely immune to the unpredictability of human nature. The chapter opens with Chichikov reviewing his accumulated acquisitions, reflecting on the apparent efficiency of his strategy. Numbers, records, and legal titles fill his mind, yet the vitality of life is absent. Gogol uses this juxtaposition to highlight a central theme. The success of corruption is measured in abstractions, while its moral cost is tangible. The emotional void Chichikov experiences begins to manifest subtly, signaling the psychological toll of his pursuit. Landowner's behavior grows increasingly complex in this chapter. Some begin to question details. Others speculate about motives, and a few hint at their own suspicions regarding Chichikov's activities. This rising awareness introduces tension into the narrative. Gogol illustrates that human curiosity and moral reasoning, even if delayed or faint, can disrupt the most carefully engineered schemes. A key element of Chapter 11 is the portrayal of Chichikov's internal dialogue. Unlike earlier chapters, where his focus is almost entirely on external tactics, here Gogol allows insight into his thoughts. Pride, anticipation, and the first flickers of unease intermingle. This introspection enhances the reader's understanding of his character, revealing that even those seemingly devoid of conscience cannot entirely escape self. The chapter emphasizes the role of societal observation in shaping behavior. Gossip, speculation, and subtle judgment continue to influence interactions. Chichikov's growing awareness of these dynamics illustrates the dual nature of social systems. They enable exploitation, but they also contain the potential for correction. Gogol subtly suggests that ethical awakening begins in small, almost imperceptible ways. Humor remains present, but is tinged with irony and foreboding. Landowners' contradictions and social posturing are depicted in a way that entertains, while reinforcing moral lessons. Gogol's satire shifts from pure comedy toward cautionary reflection, creating a balance between amusement and ethical critique. The chapter's flow mirrors Chichikov's increasing self-consciousness. Conversations and observations interweave with internal monologue, producing a rhythm that combines action and reflection. This narrative structure reinforces thematic coherence. Manipulation is effective externally, but internally, it is inherently unstable. Peasants, though largely absent, are referenced in passing as reminders of the human lives underpinning Chichikov's transactions. Their invisibility contrasts with the legal and financial records, emphasizing the moral distance Chichikov has created between himself and the real consequences of his actions. Gogol uses this technique to maintain the reader's awareness of ethical stakes. Chapter 11 also introduces the first hints of societal pushback, subtle but meaningful. Small doubts, minor confrontations, and cautious remarks from landowners illustrate that no deception is impervious. Gogol suggests that ethical structures, while weak, exist within communities, and even minimal awareness can serve as a counterweight to exploitation. By the end of the chapter, Chichikov's confidence is slightly tempered. He remains outwardly triumphant, but the narrative allows the reader to perceive emerging cracks in his psychological armor. Gogol underscores that while manipulation and moral weakness can yield temporary success, internal reflection and social awareness sow the seeds of doubt. The connectivity to earlier chapters remains strong. The personal failings of Manilov, Koroboshka, Nozdryov, Sobokovich, and Pleush, the dysfunction of bureaucracy, and the effects of gossip all converge to produce a society that enables Chichikov's rise, yet simultaneously contains latent forces of awareness. Each element reinforces the idea that moral collapse is multidimensional, dependent on both individual and collective behavior. Chapter 11 signals a thematic pivot. While earlier chapters largely document the mechanics and comedy of exploitation, this chapter introduces introspection, consequence, and the psychological burden of ethical compromise. Gogol prepares the ground for the eventual unraveling of Chichikov's carefully constructed triumph, highlighting that true success cannot rest solely on the manipulation of others. Urging the reader to consider the hidden costs of ambition detached from ethics. In summary, Chapter 11 of Dead Souls explores the first tremors in Chichikov's otherwise perfect scheme, through subtle social awareness, introspection, and the beginnings of doubt. Gogol emphasizes that moral compromise, though often rewarded temporarily, is inherently unstable. The chapter bridges the comedic and satirical elements of the novel with its deeper philosophical concerns, reinforcing the central thesis. Success achieved at the expense of human life and morality is hollow, precarious, and ultimately unsustainable. Chapter 12. The Inevitable Reckoning. Chichikov's Turning Point. What happens when a life built entirely on deception meets the weight of its own emptiness? In Chapter 12 of Dead Souls, Nikolai Gogol brings the narrative to a point where Chichikov's outward success begins to confront the moral, social, and psychological consequences of his actions. Unlike the earlier chapters focused on external manipulation, here the emphasis is on reflection, societal tension, and the subtle approach of reckoning, preparing the novel for its unresolved climax. The chapter opens with Chichikov reviewing his amassed dead souls, reflecting on the scope of his achievement. On paper, he has succeeded brilliantly. Every purchase, from Manilov's naive generosity to Plyushkin's obsessive hoarding, has been completed with precision. Yet Gogol immediately signals a contrast. The numerical triumph is hollow, disconnected from human reality. The dead, the living, and the ethical consequences exist in separate realms, and Chichikov senses this dissonance. Society, too, begins to exert a subtle pressure. Rumors and whispers, once playful or speculative, acquire a sharper edge. Landowners question motives, officials observe with scrutiny, and the social web that previously aided Chichikov now generates cautious, tentative resistance. Gogol uses these developments to illustrate a central theme. Even in a morally lax society, cumulative doubt can threaten the most carefully constructed schemes. Chichikov's internal world is a primary focus of this chapter. For the first time, he experiences unease, not as fear of legal consequences, but as a faint recognition of moral deficiency. Gogol emphasizes that the human conscience, even when dormant, can stir at moments of reflection. Pride, anticipation, and subtle guilt intermingle in Chichikov's thoughts, revealing that even a life of manipulation cannot entirely escape the echoes of ethical awareness. The narrative explores the dynamics of social perception. Landowners, officials, and acquaintances act with a combination of curiosity, skepticism, and cautious judgment. While none confront Chichikov openly, their behavior signals the first cracks in the environment that previously facilitated his success. Gogol demonstrates that societal complicity has limits, and even passive awareness can unsettle a manipulator's confidence. Humor and satire remain present, but the tone darkens. The exaggerated quirks and follies of landowners, previously a source of amusement, now underscore a more serious theme. the interplay between personal vice and collective moral responsibility. Gogol shifts the reader's focus from laughter to reflection, highlighting that satire is not mere entertainment, but a lens to examine ethical decay. Chichikov also notices subtle variations among the landowners he encounters. While some remain oblivious, others display intuition, minor caution, or a faint moral compass. These variations reinforce the novel's broader commentary. Corruption is not inevitable, and human observation, even if imperfect, introduces complexity into seemingly predictable systems. The chapter maintains a flowing narrative, moving between Chichikov's strategic actions, the responses of landowners, and his internal contemplation. Transitions are smooth, reflecting the intertwined nature of personal ambition and societal context. Gogol's structure mirrors the thematic interplay of individual agency and collective moral influence. The chapter emphasizes the consequences of abstraction. Dead souls, previously treated as transactional objects, now symbolize broader ethical dilemmas. Each name represents absent accountability, illustrating the cumulative cost of manipulating human life. Gogol underscores that deception, while effective in immediate terms, carries the latent weight of ethical, social, and psychological consequences. By the chapter's midpoint, Chichikov begins to perceive the fragility of his position. While outward appearances suggest security, the subtle shifts in social dynamics and the stirrings of his own conscience hint at potential disruption. Gogol portrays this recognition as inevitable. Every scheme, no matter how cleverly executed, encounters resistance, sometimes from the world, sometimes from within. The narrative closes with a focus on moral ambiguity. Chichikov is neither punished nor condemned outright, but the reader senses the onset of reckoning. Gogol leaves open the tension between calculated ambition and ethical consequence, highlighting that the outcomes of manipulation are always uncertain when confronted by conscience and society. Chapter 12 consolidates themes from the preceding chapters: the personal vices of landowners, the inefficiency and indifference of bureaucracy, the corrosive power of rumor, and Chichikov's own moral emptiness converge to create a complex web of ethical reflection. Gogol's structural cohesion reinforces the central thesis. Human weakness, when exploited, can yield temporary gain, but morality, social awareness, and conscience ensure that no success is truly secure. In conclusion, Chapter 12 serves as a turning point in Dead Souls. Gogol shifts the focus from external comedy and exploitation to internal reflection, societal scrutiny, and the first tremors of consequence. Chichikov's numerical victories over Dead Souls are impressive, yet increasingly hollow. Through subtle tension, psychological insight, and societal observation, Gogol reminds the reader that ethical neglect, while temporarily rewarded, cannot remain unchallenged indefinitely. The chapter sets the stage for reflection, judgment, and the unresolved culmination of the novel, leaving a haunting impression. Success built on deception is inherently unstable, and even the most skillful manipulator must confront the echoes of conscience.